I also gave you Executive Order 12333. This executive order is quite famous and important in the intelligence community for a number of reasons. So remember that an executive order is an order issued by the president. It is designed primarily, or the notion behind it primarily, is that it's supposed to sort of be administrative and kind of the internal workings and administrative policies of the executive branch. But as you might know from kind of contemporary debates, the use of executive orders has really expanded, particularly since the George W. Bush administration, and of course the Obama administration's use of executive orders in a number of areas, including in cybersecurity, has been, a topic of hot sort of political debate. This particular executive order goes back to President Reagan and kind of the height of the Cold War. So what this executive order does is it tries to clarify and consolidate the roles of the United States intelligence services, and it establishes the National Security Agency, the NSA. And notice that the remit of the NSA is for the unified and effective organization of signals intelligence. What is signals intelligence? Well, kind of think back to the old days of sail, of shipping, and so on, where you would actually have flags that you would signal to the other ships. You would do that on battlefields as well. You might use lanterns and so on, and then that, of course, all became electronic. So signals intelligence is the term for any kind of electronic eavesdropping, surveillance, that sort of thing. So the NSA is the body that, according to this executive order, is responsible for that. So notice that this executive order in Part 2.3 sets out some policies for how the federal government, for how the executive branch, the NSA, can collect information, signals intelligence, involving U.S. citizens. So the kinds of things, and there's a long list of things, I've just pulled out a few to highlight for you. So information that's publicly available, that's always going to be really not subject to any protection. Notice there's some broad categories of information that could constitute foreign intelligence or counterintelligence information, information obtained in lawful foreign intelligence or counterintelligence, information needed to protect the public safety, information acquired by overhead reconnaissance. All of these kinds of things are really covering two broad areas. One is information that's otherwise public or otherwise gathered from general reconnaissance that isn't targeting U.S. citizens, or information that is otherwise lawfully acquired in the course of ordinary kind of surveillance, signals intelligence activity. Effectively, it's setting a broad policy, again, back in the 1980s, that to the extent the law allows it, and to the extent it's needed for national security purposes, the NSA will be collecting this kind of information. Now, I just wanted to point out two other provisions of this executive order. They're really not directly relevant to our class involving cybersecurity. They are directly relevant to the use of drones during the current war on terror. So I just want to point it out. Some of it's been in the news, but it's also just a fascinating kind of reflection of history. So this relates to human experimentation and assassination. So notice that human experimentation is not allowed without informed consent, which means, of course, it is allowed with informed consent. And to some extent, I think you would see that needs to be so. I mean, there might be experimental weapons systems or other things like that. What's the historical background to this? Part of it, you may know, is the experiments using LSD on military personnel and other people without really their full knowledge to see the effectiveness of that as a battlefield weapon. Secondly, there is a prohibition on assassination. What's the historical background of that? As we've discussed a few times in class, the CIA, in fact, was involved in assassination attempts and assassinations during the course of the Cold War and the Vietnam War. That provision is the one that's really in significant debate concerning the use of drones. Is the use of drones targeted drone strikes an assassination, or is that consistent with the international law of war, the targeting of enemy combatants on the field of war? That's a big debate.